I can never remember a time when I didn't have a book going, but the first book that made a big impression on me was called Mary Plain and the Bear Pits of Burn. It was actually a copy of that my mother had been handed down to her, and it was printed on wartime paper, you know, that really thick yellow paper. And I won't go too much about Mary Plain, but basically she was a bear from the Bear Pits of Burn. And she was the first, as far as I know, user of emojis, because she wrote all her letters in this kind of little illustrated script. She lived with the owl man because he had glasses on and he liked the fur coat lady. They're inspiring stories. She's quite naughty. Bookshops and libraries have always been those places where I come in and my shoulders just go down, however stressed I am. We travelled a lot when I was a child because my dad was in the army, and we used to go to libraries all the time. That was a major, major part, and a really consistent part of my childhood too. And then wherever we were, we would go to something called the Toc H, which was the supplier of books, new and second hand. And again, it was a treat, but it was an ordinary everyday treat. It was just something that my parents did, so thanks to them, I had a very early, very prodigious book habit. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write a book since I can remember, really. And I wasn't quite sure what the story was going to be, and even when I was writing The Butcher's Hook, I wasn't quite sure what the story was going to be. But without wishing to sound too twee, I heard Anne's voice so clearly the minute I started writing her that it was almost, apart from the sheer hard work of writing it, like channeling her. And I really found then that I felt very free to go as far as I wanted on the page, which was liberating. But yeah, it sounds really silly saying I've wanted to write for so long when it's quite obvious it hasn't happened till now. But on the other hand, I think timing is everything, and this was obviously the right time for this one.
Was it always going to be fiction?
It was always going to be fiction, yeah. I've never been tempted to write anything autobiographical. I've sometimes thought biography, but the minute I start thinking about telling someone else's story, I make so much up that I might as well just make all the characters up as well. When I started writing The Butcher's Hook, I wasn't sure when it was going to be set. I knew it wasn't contemporary because the characters obviously didn't have mobile phones, they weren't on Twitter, they couldn't just hail a cab. I wanted to restrict them really by a period that I didn't know that much about, but was difficult in terms of communication and life experience. And I toyed with Tudor for a while, but then I thought actually the Georgian I'd quite like unwittingly to rescue really. I think it gets a bit swamped and swallowed by the Victorians, which came later, and I felt that especially if you live in London, but probably wherever you are in the country, you just sort of catch glimpses of this world which is so of itself and so beautiful, and the way I imagined it, luckily, was quite close to the things I discovered in research too. It wasn't a place to be alone. It was a time when actually in the 1760s when more people were living in towns than in the country for the first time. So they were busy and bustling, the Thames was rammed, you could walk from shore to shore on boats, extraordinary, from one bank of the river to the other. But I was just fascinated by that particular time, and it struck me as being a time when there was a real transition in the UK. It wasn't a particularly acrimonious time religiously. People were quite happy with their new king. The last big battles were sometime before and sometime into the future. So there was this place of almost exploration, and it seemed an ideal place to stick my difficult girl. It has to start with The Swish of the Curtain by Pamela Brown, which I read because I'd always wanted to be an actress. And for anyone who hasn't read that book, they jolly well should. And then they've got to decide whether they're a Halford or a Haverford. It's about two families who all want to act basically and put on plays. And of course they're very successful and they go to drama school. So I found that deeply inspiring. And I didn't discover till later that it was also Pamela Brown's first book, and she wrote it when she was really young. I think she started writing it when she was 14. And probably it shows, but I haven't revisited. I don't want to go back, I loved it so much. And a bit later on, I'd probably choose Diary of a Nobody, because I just think it was the first time I'd realised how funny a book can be. I just remember laughing out loud the first time I read it, and being entranced by the fact that me, alone in a room with a book, could find something that funny. And it still is. That does bear revisiting. And for the last one, can I just have a bit of Penelope Fitzgerald at the moment? I'm just going back to her and reading at Freddie's, which is just, it's more stage school stuff, but it's beautiful, it's light and delicate and amazing. I mean, people just keep writing, don't they?
Mm.